Welcome to the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network, a modern, innovative multimedia platform, broadcasting ideas and connecting minds. Every company has a story to tell, from the small startup to the large enterprise, and everything in between. This is one of them. We hope you enjoy this brand story conversation.
And here you are. You're very welcome to our first episode on location. Brand story with our good friends from SquareX. Vivek, it's good to see you.
Likewise, it's been 2.5 months, but feels like yesterday. Thanks so much for having me on the show once again.
It's always a pleasure, and this time in Las Vegas for Black Hat. Obviously, people can see the backdrop here, all the way from Singapore. A nice journey, maybe a few minutes in the flight. But you have a nice booth downstairs. We're going to come down there shortly and meet some of the other team, because I've seen all the posts where a good number of the team has come to Las Vegas to engage with customers and partners and all that good stuff. So let's just dive into it, Vivek. So I'm going to ask people to listen to the other episodes to get a kind of a broad background, but maybe just the elevator pitch for what SquareX is all about.
Yeah. So, SquareX is building a browser native security product which detects, mitigates, and threat hunts web attacks which are happening against, enterprise employees when they're online. And we do all of this in real time.
It's an important space, which we've talked about a bit before. Where I want to start is, obviously Black Hat is known for its research, DEF CON even more so, and I know you're speaking at DEF CON. And I think if somebody's in the CISO role or practitioner role, they probably know where their strengths are or where their weaknesses are, but there might still be a sense of false security. So without sharing too much, because I don't want to ruin the DEF CON talk that you're doing, but what's going on there?
Yeah, so Vegas is Sin City, as they call it. And what the talk is about is the 7 sins of secure web gateways or SASE SSE solutions. Of course, I didn't call
the 7 OSI sins?
Yeah. No. So, I've named the talk Breaking Secure Web Gateways for Fun and Profit. And really what the talk is going to be about is secure web gateways, SASE SSE solutions have now been around for over a decade, I think.
Okay.
And that is really where, to your point, people have this false sense of security that these cloud proxies are able to detect and block web attacks happening against their employees when they're online. Now, unfortunately, these proxies are looking at network traffic to infer application layer attacks. And what SquareX has done, very systematic, thorough research, is we've shown over 25 different bypasses, which are all because of architectural limitations. So what this means not 25
two,
plus, yeah.
20.
And the big reason we did that is, if you just talk about 1 or 2, a lot of times the vendors will come back and basically say, like this 1 or 2, either we don't care, or here you go, here is a little band-aid fix, right?
We have a mitigation.
Exactly. But if you go with 25 plus and then just overall point to the fact that, look, we could just keep going on, and this is only possible because of architectural issues, then it becomes abundantly clear that SWGs and SASE SSE, when it comes to solving web threats, is probably useless.
Right.
The most worrisome thing that we're going to point out is this ends up breaking a lot of the SLAs that these companies promise their customers, including one which basically says we will detect 100% with 100% probability any known malware. And we will actually show in the talk that known malware gets bypassed, with the attacks that we are developing.
Yeah, where do I go with that? I mean, just the fact that the claim was made might shift me to a different vendor anyway. But sadly, we're presented with options and we make our choices. Hopefully, the vendor lives up to their agreements. Yeah. But sounds like not in every case. So, I presume you'll talk a little bit about how what you do at SquareX tackles that problem. Do you want to do that quickly now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think how did we land upon this research is the fact that we were looking at a lot of web threats on the client side, and we quickly figured that many of these could only be solved if you had a browser native security product. And that's when we realized that these proxies were like wide open. So what SquareX really does is, because of the fact that we sit in the browser, we're able to look at all the rich DOM events, browser events, user interactivity, and we take all of that and entirely on the client side put them into machine learning algorithms so that we can do all of this detection entirely locally without even having to depend on the cloud in any way. And that is what makes this so scalable, because now imagine millions of different endpoints are all individually capable, once the policies are pushed via the SquareX product, to go about figuring all of this out.
So the first question I'm certain people ask following that description is, all right, so there's machine learning running in my browser at my endpoint now.
Correct.
The user experience must get impacted, right?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I think, in recent times, newer technologies have come, for example, WebAssembly, and every major browser now supports it. And WebAssembly actually allows us to run, native code, which previously used to be C libraries and all of that, but in the context of the browser. So the browsers have ensured that these WASM modules run in an extremely lightweight way, very, very fast. So in all the benchmarking, including those of the browser vendors themselves, clearly shows that this is very lightweight. Also, interestingly, John, if you think about it, what is the workload when it comes to, each of these SquareX extensions is running an individual user? So an individual user is like 20-25 open tabs, generally focused on one tab and maybe flipping between a few. So this isn't a very heavy workload to monitor from the perspective of a WASM module which is already running at native speed.
Okay. And because I'm picturing my browser. I'm lucky if I only have 25. But to your point, I think I'm typically working in one or two, and I might let's also point out the fact that it's open for a long time, right? Yeah. And I might flip between one and another that I opened last week or 2 weeks before. Yeah. So I presume you sit resident in that regardless, right?
Exactly.
Even it's machine sleeping and opening and all that.
So we deploy as a browser extension, and what browser extensions can do is individually look at every single tab which is running. So we can monitor everything happening in the tab, intercept it, block it, isolate it, and do a bunch of stuff. So even if the tab is inactive, maybe even for a week or a month, but the moment it becomes active once again, we are still running there. Okay. So there are no limitations when it comes to active, inactive, incognito mode, kind of work across all of that.
Right. So the other scenario, let's be honest, the point we're really talking about here is a threat finds its way to the browser and something happens. What's the user experience when they actually are under attack or something's at risk?
Correct. So if you look at organizational policies, primarily one is to stop bad behavior, and bad behavior is employees, let's say, copy pasting something into ChatGPT or trying to upload a file to get a summary, things like that. Right. And the second is, of course, attacks themselves, right, which is spear phishing, session hijacking, things like that, identity attacks and whatnot. So once these policies are pushed, what ends up happening is, if an attack is underway, we block access to that page where probably the attack is being orchestrated, and the user ends up getting an alert which basically says, hey, you were under attack, we blocked it. The administrator can now look at the entire attack reconstructed using attack graphs, another technology which we are deploying called attack vision, and a bunch of other things. So this way what happens is we stop it real time. The administrator on the other side ends up getting a complete picture of what happened, and that makes it easy for them to go about creating better internal user awareness, and at the very same time also know what threat actors are trying to do against the organization.
Right. So how does this, let's shift and speak to security leaders, the CISO and their leadership team.
Yeah.
Building out a program, I mean, everybody's pretty much, unless it's a brand new company, starts with some legacy program. Yeah. They come in and refactor it based on their experiences and new technologies, new risks and whatnot. How does a strategy and a program need to change perhaps to adopt what you're...
That's a great question. So the best part is, given browser security itself as a field is in its nascency, at this point in time there isn't any overlap with other technologies. So the browser is a blind spot. So if you go to most CISOs, and ask them, hey, what's happening in the browser, they'll basically say, we don't know. Because endpoint security isn't really looking into the browser at this point. And if you have cloud proxies, all you get is the point URLs that they're visiting. So if somebody had to roll this out very simply, they could just roll it out with a group policy, and the browser extension, just gets enabled and can automatically report back, apply policies and all of that. So what we've seen with our existing customers is generally within just a few hours, you can deploy this enterprise-wide.
Okay. And will the end user recognize that that's happened, or it's kind of completely
so
unassuming?
end user would know nothing about it.
Okay.
If we go ahead and show the extension icon, then he knows maybe a new extension is installed. But I mean, that's just a small thing which lights up somewhere in the browser, which most people don't even care about. Would they have to participate in installing? Absolutely not.
Okay.
It's completely autonomous, automatic. It just happens by itself. The only time that they would end up noticing is, if they've done a bad behavior,
right,
or someone's been attacking them.
Yeah. Okay. Which are both scenarios.
Yeah.
So we want to minimize the impact or completely eliminate the impact on the end user. And we could stop the conversation there, but guess what?
Yeah.
IT ops, security ops, they could be impacted as well. So what's the new world with browser security enabled look like for them, IT and security?
Yeah. So I think when it comes to the IT and security teams, of course, this is a new frontier, right? Which means even if you're pushing these events and all of that, they need to be able to interpret this in the context of, events which are happening. And of course, there's a little bit of training which goes in there because of the fact that, most of these individuals may not yet even understand many of these browser attacks. And that's what we've seen in the early deployments is, to an average security person, if you say, hey, SSO and SAML attacks or identity attacks happening in the browser, most of them haven't really seen how that can even be caught, because again, it's a blind spot today.
Right. So and it's not an alert they're used to.
Exactly. So I think that is really where what we've tried to do is see if we can map to things like MITRE and all of that, where even though the attack itself might be very nuanced from the perspective of, running in the browser, a client-side attack and all of that, for somebody to understand this is easier. So it's a simple example.
Please, yeah.
Let's say there is a malicious extension which one of the users has ended up installing, and we detect that, and that malicious extension was stealing credentials as you're, surfing the web when you go to different websites. So what we do is we just map this to a credential stealer.
Okay.
So
something they're familiar with.
They're familiar with, right?
Yeah.
So typically,
and hopefully have a playbook and a response plan. Yeah.
Exactly. So we are trying to do that. Of course, there are certain attacks where there isn't such a parallel, and that's really where there's going to be a net new learning. But for what it's worth, what we've seen is people enjoy that because all of a sudden they feel like they've uncovered something new, they're learning something new.
Yeah. And one of the things I like to kind of ask is, so new alerts, the last few weeks I've been looking at metrics, and what does success look like. So how does a CISO know that they're succeeding with SquareX, that they're actually, well, I presume they're going to get more alerts and hopefully they respond properly, but any other metrics or things they can look to?
So the way we've kind of looked at is, we go in, and a lot of times, of course, I'll break the CISO audience up into a few.
Okay.
The ones who are skeptical, right? They're like, hey, we don't need this visibility. That's really where we basically say, why don't you just turn the visibility on for free? And within a week, they actually come back and tell us these are all of these new things that they're looking at, and what is this, right? What is this really happening on chatgpt.com? And that is really when we go in and basically say, look, this is bad behavior or attacks which have been happening, which you've been completely blind to till this point. And that's really where a light bulb goes off, and and people are like, hey, how do we stop this now?
Right.
Now, the second, audience is who's technical, who understands this. So in that case, what we try to do is understand their organizational priorities or attacks that are already happening. So there was one customer who came in and said, oh, you know what, our executives are getting attacked via a SharePoint attack, which is really somebody sends them a valid SharePoint link, they click on it, finally go to a credential stealing page. And because you started from a site that you trust, sharepoint.com, and anybody can create SharePoints, not just your organization, people tend to believe that, they were trying to open a doc via SharePoint, and now they need to log into, Microsoft Online or whatever. And that's really where, in those cases, we go in and say, okay, is this the attack let's model it with SquareX and show you how SquareX can block it.
Okay. Yeah, the other thing I want to touch on, because I think some of the other offerings require some connection back to, I'll call it home base, right?
Right.
Through some tunnel or through some firewall. How does SquareX handle that? I'm thinking of the remote worker where they're not logging in through a VPN.
Exactly,
right?
exactly. So the good thing is, because SquareX runs entirely within the browser, at any given point, even if there is a loss of internet connectivity, it is still running. If the user is on an intranet, it's still running. If they're behind a captive portal at an airport where they still haven't logged on to the network, it's still running. When he finally connects back to the internet, we sync our logs, we sync back events, attack detections, and all of that.
Okay.
Now, unlike a web proxy, where if there is an internet connectivity loss, everything is lost. Right? There's absolutely no way now that proxy has access to the web traffic, which means it can't scrub, or at least try to look for any attack patterns.
Okay.
So we've specifically built it in a way that even large periods of time where there is internet disruption, we can still go ahead, store the events locally in the browser local storage, which is pretty much as big as the disk space itself.
Yeah, because I would imagine some sophisticated attacks might look for that disconnect event and then do their deeds. And hope for the connection to come back.
Absolutely.
I also want to touch on the toolkit. I think you tell us a little bit about that you're launching.
So I think seeing is believing, right? I mean, I could go up on stage, talk for 45 minutes, main stage DEF CON, and say these are 25 different sins of secure web gateways. This is how this is broken, blah blah blah, right? And people will enjoy it and forget about it. So having been in cybersecurity research now 20 years, what I've found is the moment you give people the right tools to test it themselves, now you've empowered them.
Right.
And that is really where, what we are doing is, we don't want these attacks to just be a theoretical discussion with some supposedly canned demos, right? Because that's the most that we can show in 45 minute talk. Yeah. And then you don't want vendors to come back and basically say, these were staged demos or whatnot. So what we are going to do at the very end is we are going to give out an attack toolkit, which any organization can actually use and test against their SASE SSE solutions. Additionally, we are also putting up a website called browser.security. So if you don't even want to set up the toolkit yourself, you can just go to browser.security, click and see those attacks just happen against your network while you are on a SASE SSE vendor pipe.
And for those wondering, that the payload's not there, right?
No.
It's just a method with which...
In some cases there is a payload, but we warn you not to execute it.
Okay.
Because what we want to kind of show is known malware can be fully bypassed using the attacks that we put out through the SASE SSE secure web gateways.
Playing with fire, I love it.
Well, you're in security,
Guess who else is playing with fire?
Yeah.
And then they have nothing to lose.
Yeah, that's true.
Right?
There's so many interesting things happening lately. Yeah,
the bad actors. All right, well, let's wrap up here, Vivek. I know you have a few days here in Las Vegas, here at Black Hat and DEF CON. What would be the final message to security leaders who have heard what you said and maybe want to take the next step?
I think, the attackers have realized that all employees are spending over 90-95% of their time on the browser. And hence, that is the application to target, because that is also the gateway, of everything in and out of the computer at this point in time. And that is really where I think there's been a lot of vendors speak about these proxies and all that they can help and scrub traffic. It's important to do your own tests and diligence. And hopefully people will start to realize that the best place to run a security product is a place where you can have 100% visibility of everything happening. And when it comes to client-side web attacks, the only place is the browser.
Yeah.
And now browsers are powerful enough that we can actually have a browser-native security product similar to SquareX.
Yeah, I love it. And so visibility, I think we talked about this before. Visibility and context and knowledge, right, can help you respond and protect. And I think the other point that that I keep hearing is that there's no impact to the end user and the information and the operations of SquareX don't impact negatively the IT and security folks, but in fact empower them as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's the idea.
Well, always a pleasure, Vivek.
To see likewise, you. Thanks so much for having me on the show once again.
Wish you the best for this week and a great talk and I don't know how many thousands of downloads of the toolkit and browser.security clicks you get, but I think we might need to do the same, Marco. Have a check. I'm not certain that Marco's doing the right stuff in his browser, so I'm going to have to run some of those tests. But anyway, thank you all for listening and watching this brand story with SquareX. Please do visit their brand directory page and connect with Vivek and the team. If you're in Vegas still, go visit the booth. They have a pretty good team here, all the way from Singapore. And Marco and I are going to go down and say hi to everybody as well. So thanks, Vivek. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on the show. Thank you.
We'll see you all soon.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and that you will come back for more brand stories on ITSP Magazine. If you want to share your company's brand story, go to itspmagazine.com and explore our advertising options to learn more. Remember to share this podcast with your friends, family, and colleagues, and stay tuned for more brand stories as we continue our journey toward redefining cybersecurity, technology, and society.